Charlie Baker, you've got some experience.
5 years ago, I started talking about the fact that nobody knew how much anything costs in healthcare. Nobody knew that Medicaid and Medicare pay 50 or 60% of what any of the private carriers pay for most services. So every time you access service as a privately insured person, you're basically paying to some extent for the shortfall in Medicare and Medicaid. And that there is huge variation in what providers get paid for services. You know, the same service to the same person with the same outcome within 20 minutes of this building at 4 to 5 different places can vary in price by 500%.
So how do you structure it?
So I said from the beginning, I've been saying for 5 years that all this data ought to be public. And I've been saying it for 5 years because I believe if you truly want to fix what's broken on the cost side in healthcare, you have to start with public disclosure. Tim, you'll never get to the point where people are in a position to actually use information, whether they're providers or employers or patients or anybody else, until there's publicly available data that people can look at and say, yep, that's good information that helps me understand price. That helps me understand.
So why didn't you do it when you were a health insurance executive? Why didn't you start posting that? You could have taken the lead. You didn't have to wait for government to do it.
No, this is something you needed to wait for government to do because everybody needs to put all that data out there. And I started talking about this 5 years ago.
But if you had taken some leadership, you could have led the way.
Tim, I did lead on this issue. I've been talking about this issue now for 5 years. I supported a series of initiatives for state government. I made a bunch of proposals with Jim Roosevelt, and they all fell on deaf ears. You were in government, governor and treasurer, and you guys did nothing about it. And I made a whole series of proposals on this that I was desperate to see people pursue. Yeah. And people pursued none of them. And we're now in a situation 4 years later.
Was that going to happen when you're governor?
Small business costs have gone up.
People aren't going to pursue anything because you're just talking about it? I mean, that's leadership, Charlie. You got to provide some leadership.
No, I know that. And I was providing leadership on that issue to the extent that I could. You guys who controlled the wheels of the machine were in a better position than I was to actually execute on this. And I have to say that part of the reason small business health insurance costs have gong up over the course of the past few years is because the state has not done a particularly good job of giving them the options that they need to purchase lower cost insurance plans, and because the state hasn't done a particularly good job through the connector of dealing with what people call sort of the jumper and dumper phenomenon, which is people buying insurance, using the system, and then dropping their insurance, which has been documented now for over a year to be something that small businesses in Massachusetts are paying for.
Governor, a lot of criticism for response, and then to Todd for another question.
The jumping and dumping that I hear from small businesses is that they get their new insurance premium increase, and they can't afford it at 24, 33, 50% increases, and so they jump from one company to the next year after year.
So you're not going to answer my question.
They can provide something, and I first of all, I think there is merit in some of the points that both Tim and Charlie have made. I like the idea and very much support the idea of transparency, of letting people know what the actual cost of healthcare is. But let's be clear: if you pay a $10 copay, whether you get your service at MGH or at Milton Hospital, it doesn't matter to most people what's behind that cost. There has to be some consequence for those
choices.
Guys, and the idea of a limited, exactly, and the idea of a limited network, which is I think what Tim was getting at, is something that we have proposed. I will say at the same time, I'm just as perplexed as I think Tim is that there was no transparency or little transparency at Harvard Pilgrim while you were in charge, Charlie. In fact, what happened while you were there is you raised premiums 150% over a 10-year period. And I'm out talking to those small businesses that you say you're talking about, and the thing that they are most concerned about in terms of being able to start hiring again and getting back to responding to the increase in commercial activity is these increases in double-digit increases year over year in health premium increases, which is why I believe and still believe we can't wait for 5 years and payment reform to be implemented. We got to have a bridge from here to there.
All I can say, guys, is if you really want to get people involved in the health insurance system, if you want to create the kinds of plans that you're talking about, Tim, and that you're talking about, Deval, with regard to giving people skin in the game and options and choices, it all starts with public disclosure around price and performance. You can't expect somebody to make a decision based on a plan design and skin in the game and all the rest if they don't have the ability to collect
and
decent
Charlie,
data.
I'm trying to agree with you. I'm just saying that is not enough, because if all you do is give that transparency, the only ones who benefit are the health insurance carriers who get information around which they can compete with each other.
Hardly.
The people who will it will matter when there is a difference in consequence for that consumer based on the choice that he or she
But don't you need the
makes.
transparency before you
do. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
We're agreeing on this, but you can't have transparency alone.
Right.
No, but the transparency piece is step number one. If you, and by the way,
you guys agree on that,
but they've had 4 years to deal with this issue, and we haven't made any progress on it at all.
And you've had 10 years
if you talk about,
and you've had 10 years to deal with it, Harvard.
Hey, look, I walked into a company that was basically on the verge of bankruptcy, and I turned it around.
And the state helped you turn it around.
That's true.
The state helped
you turn it around.
The state did not put one dime into that
Come on,
reform
Charlie,
plan.
we know.
The
It was in
state did not put
receivership.
one. Yes, it was in receivership, and most people thought it was going to go out of business,
Yeah,
but it didn't. We dug it out.
The state helped. State helped.
Governor,
a lot.
let's do
is
a
there a
little
state-
inconsistency here on your part on this healthcare, Governor. You recently had a hip replacement at Mass General.
I did.
Milton
I was
Hospital.
a baby about it too.
Milton Hospital is less
Not
than
like
2
Tom.
miles.
Tom was a man.
Milton Hospital is less than 2 miles from your home.
Yeah.
County Hospital less than 3. And if you decided to do it out in the Berkshires, because that's a nice place to convalesce,
Right.
I think it's either Berkshire or Holyoke. They all offer orthopedic services.
Yes.
All at considerably less price. And you chose the Cadillac of Cadillacs. Is it one rule for you and a different rule for all the rest
Tom,
of us?
but you just made my point. The copay and the deductible is the same for me no matter where I go. So if I knew what was behind those charges, and if I knew, and that's all I had, just knowledge, it doesn't make any difference to the consumer. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, this is the question I asked. Are you then in favor of, say, a $5,000 copay for those of us who opt to go to the great Dennis Burke at Mass General, as opposed to some doctor at Milton?
You had to throw the plug in?
I had to throw the plug in for Dennis Burke. He's the greatest surgeon in the country, and he lives in Milton, and he's a Latin school guy.
He is a pretty great.
He's a Latin
he's
school
a pretty great
guy.
surgeon. He checked on me when I was in the hospital, but I had the best, if I may say. But no, listen, there are a whole host of consequences just like that we're going to have to grapple with if we're going to get
but grapple with
down.
soothing words. Essentially what you're saying, what I'm hearing is that consumers are going to be told you're going to pay through the nose if you choose this place, and you'll pay considerably less if you choose another place.
No, Tom, what I'm saying is that if we're going to have transparency, then you've got to give consumers some choice around what that means to them. Otherwise, you don't get any real change in the cost structure in the system.
The way I look
agree
at
with
it
that.
is if you give small businesses a choice, if you choose this limited plan, you'll pay less.
Exactly.
All right, or individuals. I'd say give the consumer more choice. Like we allow them to shop. Someone made a point to me the other day. There's 2 types of surgery. The prices come dramatically down: LASIK and plastic surgery.
Publicly
Neither one of them are
available
covered.
data.
So they've come down tremendously because people have to choose and people pay.
And there's also
they don't get
publicly
coverage,
available
so,
data on that. You know how much it
but
costs.
the point is, you can shop around. The price had to
There are
come
market
down.
forces.
Market forces, not government forces, are the way to solve
And
it.
By the way, this idea of having a limited
like
network,
we did with car insurance under the governor.
Limited network plans is something we file in emergency legislation. So I think on this, Tim and I may agree.
But
This is maybe even Charlie and I.
Let's
agree.
give it a try.